Hey,
Hey, how are you?
okay. I can hear you great. That's good.
Awesome.
Oh, and a lovely background there as well. Without a green screen. Okay, so your presentation is on as well.
Cool.
So thanks for being here and
Thank
have
you.
fun.
Thanks. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to my talk about caching and optimization. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Michael Aerni. I'm a developer and designer based in Bern, Switzerland. And you can find me on Twitter or GitHub for any of my open source projects. And also make sure to check out my website for all of my awesome Statamic add-ons and freelance services. All right, the goals for today. I want you to know what is the Stache. How does it work? Why do you need it? And why does it make Statamic so much better? And also want to introduce you to all the amazing caching capabilities that Statamic provides and how you can leverage them to make your application faster. Now, why care about caching? Well, there's really two answers to this question. Number one, you want to increase the speed for your users. Number two, you want to save server resources. Now, as you probably know, working with Statamic, it's a flat file CMS. So it doesn't come with a traditional database, but with files. And a flat file system or a file system is only as good as the caching, right? So file systems have their own limitations. So the more and more files you have, the slower and slower it gets. So Statamic has an awesome way of coping with the missing database, and they call it the Stache. Now, what is the Stache? Simply put, the Stache is an efficient data storage layer that replaces the database. So when I first started out with Statamic, I thought of it like this. So you have your application cache, and then you have your Statamic Stache. And in your cache, you would have, Laravel cache stuff, your packages, even your custom code like Aerni showed you. And in the Statamic Stache, you would have the cache of your content. And it took a while for the pen to drop. It's actually, whoa, more like this, right? So the Stache is in the application cache. It's not like a traditional database. It's not its own entity. It is in the cache. So how does the Stache work? Well, the Stache is comprised of different stores. So you would have a Stache store for your collections, one for your entries, for your taxonomies, for your terms, your navigations, your globals, and more. So you would have a store for each of your Statamic content types. Now, each of the stores are organized in indexes. So an index could look like this. You have an ID and you have a title. ID and title, ID and title. This is the title index of the entry store. We'll get to that later. Now, each store has some default indexes. So the entry store has an index of ID, of slug, of title, of the published states, of the origin, and more. Whereas other stores might only have an index of ID. Now, you might ask, when does indexing actually happen? Indexing happens whenever a query is performed or when the Stache is warmed. Now, what do I mean by Stache is warmed? So let's imagine the Stache is empty. All the indexes are cleared, right? So the first time a user visits your page, the Stache is warmed, meaning all your content files on your file system, they are gathered together, put into the right store, into the right index. So they are cached, they're warmed. The Stache is warmed. They're now ready to be picked out of the Stache. Now, you can also call warm the Stache with php please stash warm. You might know about this command. This comes in really handy if you want to warm the Stache in deployment and prevent some overhead. So you reduce overhead when your first user visits the page. You can also clear the Stache with Stache clear. Or if you want to do both at the same time, you can call Stache refresh, which will first clear the Stache and then warm it again. Gonna need a sip of water here because it's demo time. All right. Before we start out, I want to mention the docs. So make sure to check out Statamic dev/Stache to read all about what I'm presenting you today. Okay, let's dive in. Cool. So on the left here, you've got Tinkerwell. For those of you that don't know Tinkerwell, it's an awesome app that lets you tinker well with your application. And on your right, you've got your code editor. Now, let's pop open the Stache configuration file and scroll down here to the stores. So those are the stores I talked about before. You have a store for your taxonomies, terms, collections, entries, etc. Now, each store comes with a class, and the class defines how the entries are stored, and the directory defines where the entries are stored. Now, let's tinker with this. So let's use Statamic facades Stache, and let's actually look, at this Stache store, this entry store, I mean. All right. Refresh. Okay, so you've got this entry store class, which is this class defined over here. Let's pop this open. So I don't want to go too much into detail. There's quite a lot going on here, but I want you to know that the entry store is a special store. So it's an aggregate store, meaning it's a collection of child stores, a collection of collection entry store. So for each, let me show you the content for each of your collections. So for books, news, and pages, you would have a collection entry store. Let me show you. So if we call this cover stores method over here, you'll get 3 collection entry store. Now, each store, got one for books, for news and pages. I can show you. Let's just get the first one. Let's call the key on it. So we see entries pages, one for entries news. The last one is going to be for entries books. Now let's take a deeper look or closer look at the entries pages store. Like we said, it's a collection entry store, and you discovered before that each store has default indexes, right? So we can look at those indexes. Let's resolve them. Resolve indexes. And voila, you get a collection of all the default indexes of the entries collection, right? So you got ID, paths, log, URI, etc. Now let's quickly dive into the title one, show you what's in there. Get the items of this index. Cool. So you got the ID, the title, ID, title, ID, title. If we get the slug, have ID and slug. If you get published, we get the ID and the published state. You get it. So we said that each store comes with default indexes. And we also discovered that indexing happens whenever a query is performed, right? So let me show you this. Let's comment this out, and let's just copy this up here. Oop. And get the entry facade. Now let's quickly query entries, and let's get query entries where, I don't know, what should we take? Let's open the, that doesn't really matter. Let's just say anything. Awesome. Awesome is true. And let's get entries where awesome is true. Just run this. There won't be any entries in here because there's no entry where awesome is true. You can delete this again. Doesn't matter. We don't need it. And let's resolve the indexes again. Now you'll see there's a new index for awesome. So whenever now a query is performed either on your backend with the entry facade like I showed you, or also with, for instance, in your template with collection pages, awesome is true. It's the same thing. This index will be added if it doesn't exist, or the respective data will be taken out of it, right? So there might be cases where you have lots and lots of content files. Maybe you have 10,000 files, and it takes a really, really long time to build this query when your first user visits the page. So if you actually know beforehand that you're going to call this query in your template or with the entry facade on your backend, what you can do is you can add to the default indexes. Let me show you. You can open the Stache configuration file once more. Let's also quickly clear the stash. We learned this command, stash clear. Okay, stash is trimmed. And now, we don't need this over here. We can simply add an indexes array over here. Let's call it something else. Let's call it Statameet. If we resolve this index again, voila, a new Statameet index has been added to the default index. You can also, if you scroll down further here, you've got global indexes. So if you add anything here, it will be added to each stores. Further down, you also got a locking configuration. So this just makes sure that no concurrent requests try to rebuild the stash at the same time. So I've got locking in seconds. And all the way to the top, I don't want to forget about this, you've got the file watcher. Now the file watcher is a really handy and nifty thing. What it does, it watches your files. So whenever you are developing locally and you go in and change a file, the Stache watcher will pick up on this change and it will index it, and the content updates on your front end. Now, you don't want to have this on production. You might, or you should, really disable this on production, set it to false, or set the environment variable to false, because you're probably not going to update content files in your code editor just through your control panel. So set this to false and you will reduce overhead. Simple thing to optimize your speed. Last thing I want to show you, that in fact the stash is part of the application cache. So if we import Illuminate support facades cache, we can get this stash stuff, right? We can get cache get. Now the stash is stored in a stash key. Then you got the items of the stash. Then you got the stash, or the store, right? In this case, entries. Then you got the child store, which is pages or news or books like we discovered. And then you got the ID. So let's get the home page. Whoop, it's null, right? So why is it null? Well, because we cleared the stash, right? The index or the stash has not been populated yet. We haven't visited the home page and we haven't warmed the stash. So if we simply warm the stash, PHP please, stash warm, and we refresh over here, we'll now see we got an entry. The entry has been cached. Let's make sure that's in fact the home page, the file data. There you go. So I hope this taught you something about how the stash works. There's a lot more going on. I might talk about it the next conference. Who knows? All right. So let's go back. Let's quickly clear the stash so we don't forget about it later. Let's go back to the presentation. Okay, cool. Now let's talk about Statamic's caching capabilities. Statamic's caching comes in two flavors. So you have static caching and you have the cache tag. Now, static caching caches your full page, whereas the cache tag only caches parts of your page. Now, both have advantages and disadvantages. And it's pretty ironic because static caching, max speed, less flexibility, and cache tag, more flexibility, less speed. So choose wisely. Now, with caching, one big thing to know, you have or you lose all dynamic functionality. What do you mean by that? Well, any time-based entry listings in your template. So let's say you have a home page like Rob showed us, and you have a news section that maybe shows the news of the last 3 days. this wouldn't work when cached statically. Also, any random entry sorting, like if you want to have a random order of your entries on every reload of the page, this wouldn't work with caching. Also, if you're pulling in data from an API like the current weather, this wouldn't work with caching. Now, let's quickly focus on static caching. Like we said, static caching caches your full page. And it comes in two flavors. You have half-measure caching and full-measure caching. Now, one big difference is that the half-measure caching is part of your application cache, whereas full measure is actually saved as HTML files into a folder. Now, half measure is really fast, and there's no config needed. You just enable it in your file, in your configuration file, and that's it. Nothing more. Now, full measure is really, really fast, and you should use it if you can, but you're also going to have to add some additional server configuration. Okay, so when does invalidation happen, you might ask? Well, each strategy has different invalidation options. So half measure has time-based invalidation, so there's an expiry in minutes. And after 5 minutes, for instance, the cache will be flushed and the page will be served afresh. You can achieve the same thing with a cron job for full measure. If you have static HTML files, you can just clear them with a cron job or scheduled command. You can also do the same for half measure, but I encourage you to use the native expiry in the config file. And obviously, if you have a page that needs to be dynamic, just exclude the critical URLs. So there's no invalidation needed. Now, there's two nifty commands. Like with the Stache, you can warm the cache, the static cache, so static warm. This will go through all your pages, visit them with an HTTP request, and cache them. Either put them in the application cache if you used half measure, or write HTML files if you choose full measure. And you can also clear the cache or the static cache, the files with static clear. Now the cache tag, on the other hand, like we learned, it only caches parts of the page. And it looks like this. In your template, you will have a tag called cache, and whatever's in between it will be cached. Now, invalidation for the cache tag can also be time-based. You can also write an event listener, like what Aaron showed you. You can hook it up to an entry saved event, for instance, and flush the cache tag. You can also use a cron job or scheduled command for this. All right, another sip of water. Because you guessed it, demo time. All right. Where's my cursor? Over here. There we go. Again, make sure to check out the documentation for static caching and for the cache tag. Read through it, get familiar with the options at your disposal. All right. So let's move over here. We got the beautiful Angeline Travis page that Rob built. And we got the code editor again. Now, just to start with, let's open DevTools and the network tab and just look at the doc and refresh this page and see how fast it is. And it's pretty slow. I don't know what's probably streaming. It's really slowing down my machine, so sorry about that. This is ridiculously slow. All right, we got 9 seconds. One thing to note, what I do all the time when developing locally, and if I don't need a debug bar, I just disable it. It's just makes everything so much slower. So just open your env file. And in your env file, you should find debug bar enabled and set this to false if you don't need it. Things will be faster. It's still loading. Oh, man. Right, let's reload. Testing our patience here. Okay, a bit faster. Really shouldn't be that slow. Should be like maybe 700 milliseconds by now. But the streaming stuff is slowing my machine down. Who else can't wait for the M1X, right? All right. what do I want to show you? Let's open the static caching configuration file. Now, all the way to the top, you can define the strategy that you want to use. So usually that's done in your env file. And down here, you've got the different strategies that I showed you. You've got half measure and full measure. Now, like I said, the half measure uses the application driver, meaning it's put in the application cache. You also have an expiry in minutes. So after, if you set this to 5, it will expire in 5 minutes. If it's null, it will never expire. And the full measure strategy uses the file driver, which means it's saved into this folder, the static folder in the public path. It also has a lock hold length. This is also in seconds, I believe. And this is to make sure that no concurrent requests try to rebuild the static cache or the HTML file at the same time. All right, so let's move on. Down here, we got the exclude array. And this is handy if you want to exclude certain URLs from being cached. So this is for any dynamic URLs. So Rob's peak already has a sitemap in here, or let's say the home page might have something dynamic you want to exclude it. Further down, you got the invalidation rules here. And this is an important thing to know. So by default, it's set to all, meaning whenever you save an entry, the whole cache is flushed, right? So you might have a cache with 100 entries in there, and you save one blog entry, and it's not connected to any of the other pages, but the whole cache, it will be flushed. So you might not want to do that. You might want to specify it more detailed. We'll get to that in a second. But first, let's quickly open up the env file and use static caching. So like I said, it's really simple. Just change this to half. And if we reload the page, okay, it takes 3 seconds. If we reload again, it should be much faster. Cool. Okay, this should be around 50 milliseconds, but because my local server is pretty slow right now, it's a bit longer. But it's cached. We'll see a big difference to before. Now, this home page, like we learned, has like this new section. And this shows the posts of the last, or like the last 3 posts, right? I went ahead and set the sort to random. So on every reload, the order should be randomized. Let's see if this happens. I reload. No, it doesn't happen. Why? Because the whole page is cached, right? So if you want to have this dynamic functionality, gotta exclude the home page. Here, save it. Now we have to clear the cache, or you can also use, no, you have to clear the cache. You can also use PHP art. No, that's not true. You can't use artisan. I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, use PHP please cache clear to clear the cache. No, you can use artisan, right? You can use artisan, same thing. Cool. All right. Let's reload this again. Now it's going to take a long time. Shouldn't take that long. But if you see now, it's going to take a long time again. It's not cached anymore. And this should be randomized now. Whoop, random order, right? And again, reload again, random order. Now, I want to quickly show you what this invalidation rule here does. So if I'm going to close this, it's slowing everything down. Open the news tab. Okay, so you got the news listing. Let's open the blog post. And also let's open the blog post over here in our control panel. Come on. Okay, so this just got cached, right? The second reload should be faster. Yep. This just cached, second reload is faster. Now, if we change the title here, just delete it, save it. Blog post should change the title. Take longer again because it flushed the cache. Okay, cool. Second refresh is faster because it was cached. And over here, you should get the same thing. Can take longer because the cache was flushed. Yeah, it updated. And second refresh will be faster. It's served from the cache. Now, invalidation always happens on the entry that you save. So there's no configuration needed there. But let me show you what happens if we set this to an empty array. And we also got to clear the cache again for this to work. Cool. Now let's update. No, let's reload this first. Okay, both pages should be cached now. Now let's change the title here again. Open up the blog post. Yeah, this invalidated and was served afresh, was cached again, it's fast. But over here, it didn't flush. That's because we didn't specify what should be flushed. So if you don't want to use the all array or the all rule, what you can do, you can define this yourself. So you can say collections, then the name of the collection, then an array of URLs. Now you can specify which URL you want to flush when you save a news entry. So in this case, we want to flush /news. Save. Now, if we change the title here again, let's change it to Rob is amazing. Oh, spelling mistake, whatever. And we save this or reload it. Voila, it has been flushed. It has been cached again. And this obviously always flushes and caches because it's the entry itself that we saved. All right, so that's the rules array. That's what you can do with it. Now, I want to show you another nifty trick and talk about the cache tag, when you might want to use it. So like we learned from Rob, Peak comes with an amazing page builder. If it loads, I can show you. All right, you've got this page builder. And page builders are really cool. They give your client a lot of options to build a page, but they come with one big disadvantage. And that is if you've got a set in there that needs to be dynamic, you can't cache a page statically. It's not a smart idea. So in this case, we've got the introduction, call to action, and book highlights. They're all not dynamic, but the news role should be dynamic. So what do we do? The only option right now is to make sure to not cache the homepage, right? But there's a way around this. So to show you, I'm quickly gonna disable, not bool, I wanna say null. Disable the static caching strategy and just clear the cache quickly. So we have a clean slate and open up the homepage. Now let's open up in a code editor this page builder. I believe it's in the default antlers. Yep, there we go. All right. So what if we use the cache tag here and cache each set? Let's see what happens. We save this. We reload the page. Whoa, what just happened? Exactly. So the problem if you just use the cache tag, you need to define a unique key so it knows where to look for it, right? So in this case, what you can do, get the key parameter and use the type of the set. And also I suggest you use the count as well. So to make sure if you have multiple introduction sets, it's not the same key being used. This would also be a great use case for a custom tag like Aaron showed you. It could be like random ID or something that just randomizes a key. But let's just keep it simple with type and count. Now, if we refresh this again, it takes long because it caches everything, and there we go. This is now all cached. The news section or news set is cached, this is cached, this is cached, and this is cached. To show you, let's change the title. Just Angeline, and reload the page. Yep, still the same. So what you can do to invalidate this, on the tag itself, you can use the for parameter and set this to an amount of time. So for instance, 10 seconds. So just to demonstrate this, Let's just flush the cache and load the page. Okay, it's Angeline. Let's just be fast and change this to Travis before the 10 seconds end. Reload this again, should still be Angeline. All right, actually, the server was faster than I thought. But this invalidates after 10 seconds. You get the point. What you can also do, you can put this in a config file. That's what I would do if I use this. So site config Statamic static caching and maybe cache tag expiry. Then in your static caching file configuration, maybe up here you would have cache tag expiry on the tags. Tag expiry. Set this to 10 seconds. I would probably also use an environment variable, so you can set it there and then use the same expiry for all your cache tags. That's a smart idea. But for now, let's just put this to 60 minutes. Okay, let's keep going. So as we said, each set is now cached by their own key and expires after 60 minutes. But we got this new section here, right? It should be dynamic. It should be random order. Okay, we cleared the cache. Now, second. Okay, now it's cached. All right. So it doesn't change the order anymore. So what could we do? What if in our control panel, we'd have a toggle here to say, okay, we want to exclude this set from the cache, right? So let's open up our field sets. And if you want to do it the peak way, you have the common reusable fields. And we're going to add a new field here of toggle. Call this exclude from cache. Set the default value to true. Now go back to the field sets and import this in our news role set. Link existing, get the exclude from cache, link it, finish this, whoop, and reload. Cool. So now we got a new toggle. So whenever this is on, we want to cache it, or we don't want to cache it, I mean. So just some simple templating. If exclude cache, we want to get the partial uncached, but if not, we want to get the partial cached. Like this. So we have to save this. So the exclude from cache is saved in the file. And now on the reload, it will be dynamic. And I would like to show you how much faster it is in the dev tools, but it will just slow everything down. Just trust me, it's faster. You can check it out yourself. It's a pretty cool hack. I also got an amazing add-on, just a quick note on that. It's called Dynamic Cache. It does the same thing, except it doesn't use the cache tag. But what it does, it automatically populates your exclude array and your invalidation rules on save. And you can use it with half measure and full measure strategy. So no cache tag needed there. Now, another thing to note is your navigation. So if you open up our main navigation, something Jack recently said, and I didn't know about, but the nav tag is pretty unperformed under the hood. It's not really smart about caching. And if you have a lot of navigation items, you know, you have a huge mega menu or whatever, it could be really slow. So a no-brainer, just always wrap your navigation tag in a cache tag. Wrap it in here, okay, save this, refresh. Now the navigation is cached. Let's see if it works. Whoop. Okay, what happened? You might guess it. So we're on the about page, right? And now we're on the books page, but we want to have the active state. So by default, what the cache tag does, it has a scope, and it has a scope of site, meaning whatever is between the cache tag will only be cached once for the whole site. So what you could do for the navigation, set the scope to page. Now, whatever is in between the cache tag will be cached for every page. So if you have books, it will be cached. Right, works. About, works. Awesome. Very cool. I quickly also want to show you, so that's about it for the cache tag though. Stache Watcher, turn this off if you don't need it. I have it on because I work in the content file locally. And another thing is the cache driver. So as we learned, the Stache is part of the application cache and uses this driver under the hood. And Laravel supports like Redis, it supports memcached, and so on. There's different drivers. So if you use Forge or Ploy for your servers, you have Redis installed, I believe, for sure. So just use Redis. It's a very simple configuration. Redis, I did some testing, some benchmarking. In read speeds, it's pretty much similar to the file driver, but it really speeds up, like up to 5 times faster in write performance. And that's especially handy when you have a huge, like a lot of content files and it takes forever to rebuild your Stache. It can be up to 5 times faster if you use Redis here. All right, back to the presentation. I want to round up this talk with some hot tips. So one tip, clear the cache after git pull or branch change. So a lot of times you might have content files that change between git commits or between branches, and there might be still some weird stuff going on with the cache. So just always clear the cache. It's simple, PHP please cache clear. Another tip, clear the config cache if changes have no effect. So your config might have been cached. So if you change any config file or any configuration in your env file and it has no effect, just run php artisan config clear and you should be good to go. Another thing I only learned down the road is only clear the Stache once. So like we learned, PHP's cache clear will also clear the Stache because the Stache is part of the application cache, right? And you can also clear the Stache with Stache clear. So especially in your deploy scripts, just run PHP please cache clear. You don't need Stache clear. Another thing, warm your caches on deployment. So if you have 10,000 entries, you really don't want to build the Stache when your first user visits your blog listing. You don't want that. You can prevent this overhead. Just run php please stash warm in your deploy script. You're good to go. Also, if you use static caching, php please static warm. And if you use any asset presets, assets generate presets. Next tip, I showed you this, disable Stache Watcher on production. Just Statamic Stache Watcher false in your env file. You're good to go. Also, disable the debug bar when you don't need it, especially when developing locally and your service really slow. Disable it, simple, in your env file. I just showed you this as well. Use Redis as cache driver and the queue driver if you can. Just change it in your env file. No additional configuration needed. And also cache expensive query with the cache tag, like the nav. Then Aerni already mentioned it. Forms, they don't work with static caching. And if you have any forms on a page, you have to exclude the URLs, or you got to submit the form with Ajax. So take a peek at Peek and take a look at how it's done. Peek uses Alpine.js to submit the form with Ajax. And also, Livewire doesn't work with static caching. There has been lots and lots of talk about it on Discord. I've been one of the leading voices, and it's really annoying me. And please teach me better. You have to exclude the URLs, and I'm really sad myself. So please find a way and make it work. So that's about it, folks. Thank you so much for your attention, and see you next time.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Thanks.